3 comes from a tournament played in England in 2004. Again, the two players are graded below 2200. Playing white is a fellow called Mark White. Playing black is a fellow called Peter Hempson, a veteran player from the north of England. But I ask you to consider your own strength and what you're likely to expect in your own games. My guess is you're likely to expect something like the game we're about to see, which is a very reasonable game between two reasonable players. I mean, don't forget, these guys are graded in the 2100s. That's better than 95% of chess players. So, make no mistake, these two guys are pretty strong. Well, anyway, in this game, we once again encounter our old friend Bishop d3, which is about as tedious a move as you're likely to see. In the last game, Bishop g6 was played. This time, Black decides to dispense with any artifice, and he takes on d3 and plays e6. So it's just a question of whether White can work up any sort of advantage whatsoever in this position. Now, the average player looks at this position and he says, but hang on, White's got 3 pieces out, and he's about to bring a 4th piece out. Black hasn't developed a single piece yet. Surely, White must have some sort of an advantage here. The problem with this type of assessment of a position is that it doesn't take into account where the pieces are being developed to. It's quantitative versus qualitative development. The point is, development in itself is not as important as where the pieces are being developed to. It's no good putting a piece out if it doesn't really improve its position. So White's got all these pieces out, but is it a question of all dressed up and nowhere to go? Because the black position has no weaknesses. Over the next couple of moves, Black catches up by bringing the knights out. And now White is really casting his eye around for a target. A basic rule of chess, a basic understanding is that when you've got an advantage in development, you've got to open up the game to take advantage of your leading development. If you don't do this, the advantage of the leading development will evaporate, and you're left with nothing. If you don't find the right moment to attack, you are not going to have any advantage whatsoever. And that's precisely what happens in this game. White can find no object of attack in Black's position, because there isn't one, by the way. And Black basically easily equalises. I mean, a move like a3 is really the start of White's downhill progression in this game. White can't really see what to do, so he just plays some move like a3. He says, well, I'm just going to keep you out of b4 in this game, and hope that helps me. I mean, if I was White in this position, well, you know, it's not that easy. Probably I would just centralise a rook. I'm not even sure which one. Probably rook a1, something like this, and then follow up with knight e5. But I mean, I'm in no means convinced that is going to be a continuation which gives White in. But a3, of course, can't really help White at all. I don't think it's a great move. Bishop e7, of course, the position's equal. White follows this up by centralising the rooks, and now Black brings his queen out to b6. A good square for the queen, forcing White to think about the b2 square. And now White makes what I consider to be a very strange move. b4. It's almost as if he's saying to himself, well, I have to find some way of justifying that move a3, so I might as well push b4. But of course this move gives Black targets on the queen side, which Hempson is quick to seize on by playing a5. And I think b4 is definitely a mistake. I mean, I think it just helps Black really by giving it some targets. Probably in this position, White should just accept that the pawn on b2 is weak. He's got to play some move like bishop c1. There's nothing wrong with that, no loss of face in playing such a move. Black will play rook Qd8, and this position is level. Black is looking to play perhaps a move even like c5 in the very near future, bringing his position to life. But b4 is definitely not that great, and a5 starts to get to grips with the White game. For the first time, Black is looking to create counterplay. Well, White went knight a4. I think White strikes me as being a very stubborn player. I mean, I can see that in his moves. Sometimes you can assess a guy's character in the moves that he plays. It's almost as if White doesn't want to take a backward step. He's played a3, so he has to play b4. Now he plays b4, he has to play knight a4. But he's walking straight into black's counterplay. Queen's come off on b5. White played knight to c5. Again, no backward step. A takes b4, A takes b4. And now the knight comes to b6. An interesting offer to trade advantages in this position. So that when white plays knight takes b7, black intends bishop takes b4. Now just going back to the game after knight b6, perhaps white would have been more sensible to play c3. I think he didn't play c3 because he was afraid of black bringing a knight to d5 and then perhaps the rook to a3. I mean, I think black is in fine shape in this position after something like knight fd5, bishop d2, and now rook a3. I think there's no doubt about it. Black is absolutely fine here because he's controlling all the light squares and the pawn on c3 is pretty weak. So perhaps that's why white went knight takes b7, but after bishop takes b4, black is well in the game. And after rook f1, Hempson activated with knight bd5, with perhaps slightly the better of things. Bishop d6, bishop takes d6, knight takes d6, and now b4. Freezing the pawn at c2 and maintaining a very small edge. Rook a1, rook a d8, knight comes to b7, rook c8, knight c5, and now rook a8. Playing the next few moves is not especially interesting, but we should know that black is playing very patiently. He understands he's slightly better in this position because he's got more control based on a better knight on d5 and the pawn on b4 restricting white's pawn on c2. It's just a question of can black force an entry into white's position. Well, Hempson puts his knight on c3, and then after rook e1 he plays his other knight to d5. So that's a small improvement in position. You've got to work with small advantages in a position like this. You've got to exhibit patience and you've got to exhibit a desire for the fight, because white isn't going to just relinquish the game just like that. He's only very slightly worse. And, well, I think you've got to enjoy playing chess to play on in a position like this. Hempson is a guy who's been playing chess for many, many years. He clearly relishes the type of game we see here where it's purely strategical. Black is basically trying to increase his advantage slowly, step by step. There's no attack to be seen for white. So black can just settle in patiently and play his brand of chess. Rook a3, just increasing the pressure on white. White played knight e5, and now black continued this process of improvement with rook f8. And now white's got to make a decision. He played knight b3. King f8, very patient. Knight c4. And now rook a2. This was always going to be the problem for white, the c2 pawn. But for the time being, black's not threatening anything. So rook ec1. King e7, this is the type of improvement, of course, white doesn't have for the time being. White would like to play king e2, but he cannot. Knight c to a5. Rook comes to c8. Knight comes into c5. Rook takes a1. Rook takes a1. Knight b5, attacking the pawn on d4, which white hastily defends by knight a b3. Knight a3, blocking the rook out of the game and attacking c2. Okay, white can defend for the time being, and black moves in with his knight to c3. g3. Knight cb5. Knight d3. Rook c4. Well, alarm bells are now starting to ring for white because he suddenly finds his whole position under pressure. It's almost as if black's pressure has come from nowhere, really. Black was working with very small things in this position. And remarkably, it's actually quite difficult for White to hold this now. It's amazing that, White could have gotten himself into such a mess. But basically, White's problem was he had no active plan. Whereas Black could always look forward to probing the White position, White had no similar idea. He was just sitting, waiting almost for Black to do his thing, and then White would see whether he could hold the position against him. Well, after Rook c4, it's all becoming clear. Actually, White can't hold his position together. And White, well, reluctantly played knight a5. But of course, now he comes in and takes on c2. Rook takes, knight takes, knight c6 check. It looks as though White might be getting back into the game by virtue of knight d takes b4. But after knight takes b4, knight takes b4, knight takes d4, suddenly White is a pawn down, faced with a miserable struggle to try to hold this position. In general, knight endings can be assessed in the same way as pawn endings. The knight is a piece which likes the action on one side of the board only. Well, this position suits knights perfectly. Of course, if this was a straight pawn ending, we could say that Black has a fairly easy win with 4 pawns against 3. Okay, it takes a long time, but the process is inexorable. Eventually, Black creates a passed pawn and then wins quite easily by penetration with the king. Well, let's just see what happens here. f4, it's almost as if White can't quite believe what's happening to him. e5, there's the passed pawn coming up straight away. King goes to e3, knight f5 check, king f3, king c5 attacking the knight, and after knight d3, king d4 was played, now threatening e4 check. So White drops his knight back to f2. Knight d6, it's all about a passed pawn, which Black possesses. This is the reason why White can't hold this position with best play. Probably the defender should trade pawns in a position like this. The less pawns there are, the less onerous the task for the defender. But it has to be said, this pawn on the e file is exceptionally strong. And, well, Black is very methodical, just tying White down. Hempson really does show his experience in this endgame. Just continuing to play, manoeuvring ideas, completely tying White down, improving his position move by move, very patient. Suddenly White has a threat. Hempson negates that threat. Yep, king d5 was played, king e3, knight c4 check, king f4. Now there's perhaps another threat of going king g5, maybe scrambling a draw somewhere. Black is on the ball, diffusing that threat with h6. Alright, g4. We're still waiting to see how Black is going to win. Knight comes to d6. King goes to e3. Let's drop back. I thought when I first saw this game, well, how about knight e3? Not sure that it helps White here after king d4. After knight c2, king d3, knight e1, king e2, White still has the same problems as before. And after knight princess g2, king f2, knight e3, Black has continuations like g5. So that just shows you the difficulty for White in a game of this type. Of course, this position is completely lost. So, get back to the game now, and king e3. King e5, knight a3, and now the excellent move h5, creating a square for the knight on f5. White takes, probably correctly, reducing his potential problems. Knight c2 is played, knight f5, and finally Black forces an entry for his king on f4. Knight e1. Well, just going back, it's impossible for White to defend this now because his pawn on h4 is going. Knight e1 is a fairly miserable move. Of course, Hempson takes. Knight c2, knight f5, knight e1, knight e3, a beautiful move, and well, after that White resigned. Essentially, there's no defence to the advance of the h pawn here. white is completely tied down. Now that was a long game, and it wasn't especially exciting. However, it is very typical of this system, and it points up a quality I think needed to get the absolute best out of the black idea, and that is patience and good technique. I think this is what repeated use of this system will actually teach you. You will learn to be patient, and you will learn how to play positions which perhaps look dry, but in some ways, because you've studied them, are much easier for you than the opponent. I think a lot of white players will not have actually looked at this type of position at all, and they're likely to become very tired and frustrated and maybe hit out like white did here with a move like b4, immediately weakening his position and condemning him to a very long and fruitless defence.